Okay, so we're back in our Arnold scene, and our alien has landed on a planet that is apparently made of paper. So just to make this a little more interesting, let's make this a terrain that actually is believable for an alien world. So to do that, we're going to go to a website we've visited before, Polyhaven. So let me open this up and pull this over. And you'll see within Polyhaven, there's also a bunch of free textures you can download. So again, textures are maps that are plugged into a material in different areas, right? And they're not the material itself. So if we need something to look like wood, we can adjust those sliders all day long. It's never going to look like wood. We need an actual image of wood, or something that generates the texture of wood to map into the color layer, right? So in our case, we're looking for some terrain. So I'm either going to use terrain or aerial. Aerial feels a little more, I don't know, some of these look pretty cool. Actually, let's just go back though and do, I think, terrain for right now. We're up there pretty close on it. And we want to avoid the ones that have like big protrusions like this here, right? You can get that with a material. It's actually, or with a shader. You just have to use stuff like displacement maps, and I don't really want to get into that too much in this class. It's a little bit more advanced. So instead, I'm going to use something with a moderate level of bumpiness to it, but hopefully still kind of keeps its silhouette shape, like maybe something like this, or gravelly sand, or forest ground. Let's try. I'm gonna go bold and try this forest ground 4, just to see if it'll work. And so you'll see like there's a 3D view option where you can see what this would look like, and then you can see each of the different maps that it's going to export out, and what they look like, right? This doesn't tell you a whole lot right now, but we'll see them as we're plugging them in. But some of them are very confusing. Like, why is this like yellow and green, right? Why is this one like blue and purple, right? So let's click our little drop down box here, these little 3 lines, and I want to make sure I'm downloading the right files. And the only thing I really need right now is a diffuse, which is the color, a normal map, which is going to be that bumpiness, and then the AO roughness metal, which is a single image that contains some information about ambient occlusion, roughness, and the metallic state of this. So with all those set to PNG, I'm just going to download that, put that in my source images folder, and then I can go to my source images folder and extract that out. Extract all. There we go. And I should now be able to just delete this zip file because my texture maps are in this forest ground texture folder. There we go. So let's look at our material. Right now our ground plane has a material on it, but I want to create a new one for it. So just to make sure, I'm going to delete my history, and then I'm going to go into the hypershade, and I'm going to create a new AI standard surface. Put that out there. We're going to name this ground mat, and then I'm going to apply ground mat to the ground material, or to the ground object itself. So this one right here, right click, assign material to selected. And you'll see now it is in there. And very quickly we can see how these materials work, or how these textures work. If I click this checker box here, actually, let me graph our network so we mainly see it. Kind of minimize some of this. And so if I click this checker box and choose file, that's not working. I think I need to make sure my ground material is selected. We're in ground material, checker box, file. There we go. And so it connected it to it, right? And you can see that just like we had with that checkerboard earlier, now it's looking for a file to plug into the base color. And so I can go to my little folder, and go to forest ground, textures, and I'm going to choose the diffuse there. Let open, and we should start seeing this render in our viewport in a second. There we go. All right. And that is not necessarily realistic looking, right? Let's sort of tumble around here a little bit and see what this looks like. This does not feel like what we were hoping for, right? It looks like you're standing on a poster that is a printout of this ground texture. So let's try to see if we can make that look better. So the first thing we're noticing is it's stretched really far, right? And it's because that's one texture map trying to cover this entire plane. Well, luckily we know that these textures are repeating, and that we've downloaded. It's a repeating pattern. So if I try something more like 8 by 8, let it repeat about 8 times each. What's that look like? Maybe that's a little bit closer in terms of size, right? I could probably even go a little smaller, maybe that 10 by 10. What does it look like? There we go. Yeah, so maybe that's going to feel a little better, but it's still glossy. It's still like noticeably like those rocks are not poking up out of there, right? And like dirt really isn't reflective. Like I can see the reflection of the ship in the dirt. All of those are elements of the ground material, right? And we can manually adjust some of those, right? We could turn the roughness up so it doesn't feel as glossy anymore, right? But instead, think of it like this: like certain parts of the ground may be glossy, and if it had mud on it, certain parts of it might be. So we're going to, instead of just changing it all over, we're going to use a texture map to drive some of that information. So we're going to do that first with the by adding another file in here, and we can do that just by if I sort of go back to just in general Maya, I guess, and type in file. You'll see that there's another way I can just click that and just bring this in and bring in a file that way as well. And that's how, if you were working with the open PBR material, it might be a little easier to use. So if I choose this, I'm going to go choose that weird one, right? It is let me find it here. It's labeled ARM, which stands for ambient occlusion, roughness, and metalness, right? So it's weird to think about how this works, but basically every image is made up of 3 color channels: red, green, and blue, R, G, and B. And what this has done is, since both ambient occlusion, roughness, and metalness are really just a single vector, a single value, it's basically baked those values into the different color channels. So red is ambient occlusion, green is roughness, and blue is metalness, right? So if I choose open on that, why that works is because I can see my R, G, and B, and that's why I know R is my ambient occlusion. And so if I really wanted to map ambient occlusion into something, I would map that into base. I'm not going to see a huge result immediately because I don't think that there was a lot of ambient occlusion happening on that one. Maybe it changes it a little bit. Yeah, we're getting a little bit more lumpiness there. So G is roughness. So I want to put that into the specular roughness. And then B is metalness. Say ARM RGB. So B for metalness, I'm just going to plug that into the metalness. And so that's starting to feel a little bit more like maybe the color or texture of dirt now, right? There's one thing I do want to do on this map before I move on, is right now if I select that, with my diffuse, it's fine for the color space to be sRGB. But for these other things, I want to make those, if I click this drop down here, I want to choose utility and raw. that's just going to interpret the color of those maps better. So that's just an important thing to remember. Final thing we're going to do, and so if I zoom in here, like this is feeling better. This is feeling more like dirt, but it's not lumpy. It's still very smooth, and it feels like an image that's been printed on the ground, not the actual ground. So where that's really going to come in is if I go to my ground plane and I go down to geometry and choose this bump mapping. I click my checkerboard here and do file. Again, it creates creates 3 nodes. It's going to create my 2D placement texture, right? Actually, I realized I need to change the placement on this. If this is at 10, this needs to be at 10 and 10 as well. Yeah, that's lining up a little bit better. And then the same here on this one. This needs to be at 10. Well, let's go ahead and leave that one wrong so you can see what's going to happen. So first thing, I'm going to go to my file, and I'm going to click this checkerboard, and I'm going to go find the normal map. So NOR. Open that. And what you'll probably see is it changes in the viewport quite a bit. That's what it does there. And then over here, you'll suddenly see it starts to make it feel like there's little bumps all over it. A couple of things wrong with that is that they're the wrong type of bumps, right? And they're in the wrong place because the scaling is wrong. So if I go change this back to 10 and 10, there we go. That's lining up a little bit more now, right? A couple of other things I need to do. Again, I need to make sure this is set to raw and not sRGB, right? There we go. And then the final thing is actually in this additional node that is created here, this bump 2D. So we don't actually want to use bump, but we want to use something called tangent space normals. And when I click that, then suddenly this starts to feel a little bit more realistic, right? And it kind of feels like I can see the roughness or like the lumpiness on this environment. In fact, if I start changing the light, the little crevices will actually react to the light. So that is the whole point of a normal map, is to make it look like all of that little detail is actually raised and lowered. Bump map was the old version of it. Tangent space normal, what we're going to be using the most. Okay. And so now if I zoom in on this and we sort of pan around in our scene, you can see this is feeling a little bit more like what we were probably wanting, right? It could look better still yet, but that normal map, maybe I'll play around with a couple of different ones to see which is going to be my favorite one. But this is a pretty good starting point. So for here, I'm going to move on to texturing some more objects.